So this is Ted's Caving Journal, one of the earliest copypastas / creepypastas on the internet. I will add effects to pretty much when this little adventure was happening, and it'll all be normal when it's pretty much the commentary. March 23rd, 2001. Due to the overwhelming number of requests I have received to tell about my discoveries and bizarre experiences in a cave and far from my home, I have created this webpage. I will outline the events that happened to me during the past few months, beginning with my journey into a familiar cave in December of 2000 and ending, well, it hasn't actually ended yet. I will use my caving journal as the text to tell about my recent experience. I will give them to you as I experienced them in chronological order. I've included photographs that were taken during the many trips into the cave. I have also created a few illustrations to help the reader get a better idea of what things look like in the cave. All of the photos were taken by me or one of the few people I went into the cave with. I want to point out a few things before I tell about the events. Most of the pictures were taken with a Kodak disposable type camera. I had a better camera into the cave on one or two of the trips. Pictures on this site are all original photos and have not been messed with or enhanced, other than when noted. As a rule, I get my pictures put onto disk at the time of developing so I don't have to scan them later. This ensures the best digital quality. I will not reveal the names of the other people involved in the experience. If you know me well enough, you probably know them already. I will not reveal the location of the cave to anyone for any reason, so please don't ask. I refuse to be held accountable for anyone's life but my own. I will refer to this cave as the Mystery Cave. It's not the real name. If you think these events sound far-fetched, I agree. I would come up to the same conclusion had I not experienced them. I would try to finish the site as soon as possible. Check today on the main page to see when I've made the updates. To protect myself from people who might want to copy the site, I include the following. All text on this page and following pages are my own words, copyright 2001. Ted. Caving Journal, December 30th, 2000. B and I decided to get in one more caving trip before the new year, so we set our sights on the Mystery Cave. It's not a spectacular cave, but since neither of us have been caving in a while, it would be nice to go in any cave. There was a bit of an excitement to this trip. There was a small passage in the lower portion of the cave that I wanted to check out to see if it was possible to get past it. It had a small opening, but lots of air blowing out of it. Even though it is way too small for me to climb through, I've never even checked to see what was inside that passage. We got our gear, headed up, and hit the road by 3 p.m., and we got to the cave in great time, since B likes to drive fast. We anchored from the usual tree and began to rappel into the cave. I went down first, I got my gear together, and then B came down. I will refer to B many times. We've been caving together for many months now. He was injured in a cave-in accident a few years ago and was told he would never walk again, but through hard work and perseverance, he not only walks, but can get around very well in caves. The trickier parts of a cave might slow him down a bit, but he can make it. He patiently works through an obstacle until he gets past it. As for the reference to the small opening in the cave, there is a saying among cavers, if it blows, it goes. If a passage has a good flow of air, it's probably worth investigating. After we explored all the usual passages, we climbed down to check in the hole. The hole is located deep in the cave, near the lowest part of the cave. It's on the side of a cave wall, about 3 feet from the floor. To look inside the hole, I have to kneel down to duck under an overhang of rock. I used my backup mini mag light and held it inside the hole to see what I could see. I was excited by what I saw. The wall around the hole was about 3 to 5 inches thick. It led into a tied passage. The passage opened up just a bit inside the hole. It continued back about 10 to 12 feet in a small crawl space. After that, it seems to really open up, although how much we couldn't tell. This could be a virgin passage. Obviously, no one has passed through this route, but there could be a way into the passage from the other side. To even get to the crawl space, we would have to enlarge the opening. Currently, it's about the size of my fist. Once we get past the opening, we would have a tight crawl back to where it opened up. It would take some work, but we thought we could do it. We sat down for a few minutes to rest and contemplate our plan of attack. While we sat there in the darkness, we could hear the wind howling from the other side of the passage. It was a low, eerie noise. We could hear a low rumble from time to time. No big deal, though. The cave is in the vicinity of a highway that has heavy trucks drive on it, and we figured the rumble was the effect of the trucks resonating through the rocks. We determined that our best plan would be to hand a cordless drill into the cave to drill into the rock. Then we could take a bullpen and a small sledgehammer and break up the rock. Seems pretty straightforward. We would widen the hole big enough to squeeze in and see what was on the other side. The efforts to haul all the equipment down to the hole would be a pain, but we hope it'll be worth it. I named the passage Floyd's Tomb after Floyd Collins. Seemed to look like the tight spot where Floyd spent his last miserable days on Earth.
You see, Floyd Collins was a caver back in the early 1900s. He got stuck in a tight crawl space and was unable to free himself. It's an amazing story that is detailed in a book called Trapped, the Story of Floyd Collins. I think that was the title. I don't recall the author. Calling our passage Floyd's Tomb was not only a tribute to Floyd, but a commentary on the size of the passage. In retrospect, it's funny how simple I thought it was going to be. I figured a few hours work and we would be in. Had I known how long it was going to take, I doubt I would have even begun this project. Had I known what I was going to experience in the cave, I never would have returned.
We gathered our gear and headed to the surface. Normally, I would care less if I ever come back into this cave. There is nothing special about it, but now I was psyched about getting back and getting through. We haven't even left the cave when we were planning our return trip.
The rest of the journal entry talked about the climb out of the cave, our dinner, and our trip back home.
January 27th to the 28th, 2001. B and I were both excited to get back into the cave and get back to work. I figured with about 4 hours work, we could be in and see what was on the other side. We've arranged to borrow a DeWalt cordless drill to bring with us. We also had masonry bits to drill with, sledgehammers to break up the rock, and bullpens to insert into the drill holes, and a few other tools that we ended up not using. Getting the tools down to the work site proved to be a challenge. One of us would climb down the rope and stop at a ledge or a good resting place, then the other person would lower the tools. We keep repeating this routine until we got to the bottom of the cave. Then we have to drag the tools to the hole. It took about an hour to finally get to work. B took the first turn at the hole. After about an hour exhausting work, we could tell we were not going to get through this in one session. We keep trading off after we worked ourselves into a sweat. One would take a break, get some food and water while the other went to work. The routine went like this. To begin work, we had to get down on our knees and do our best to avoid smacking our heads on the ceiling. Working in this awkward position, we would drill into the wall around the hole. That was difficult work. We really had to push on the drill, and it was still slow progress. Then we insert the bullpen into the hole and hammer it until the rock broke up. Then we would try to repeat the process. To give you an idea of how slow it went, the typical size rock that would break off was about fingernail size. If we broke off a large piece about a third the size of my palm, it would be cause for celebration. From time to time, we would just wail on a cold chisel with a 5-pound sledge. It was a slow process. The problem with the sledge was that we couldn't take a good swing because of tight quarters.
Even though we spent many hours and several trips working on the hole, we never did find a better technique for widening that hole. The drill, bullpen, and hammer got the best results for our efforts. We came up with some crazy ideas for breaking up the rock. Everything from TNT, never seriously considered, to hauling some generator in the mouth of the cave and running an extension cord to a jackhammer. We even thought about using liquid nitrogen to freeze the rock and make it more brittle.
After a couple of hours of hard work, we realized what our limiting factor was going to be. It was about then that our first battery met an abrupt death. We had a second battery, so we swapped them out. The second battery lasted a little longer because we hammered and chiseled a little more often and a little longer each time. Finally, after about 3 more hours of drudgery, the second battery died and we called it a night. Phew, We could tell that we had done some work on the cave, but it was not much. For the first time since we got in the cave, we sat back. Both of us took a break. It was nice to check out the results of our hard work. Then we noticed the howling again. It seemed to be a little louder than the last time we were there. We just figured the wind was blowing a little stronger outside. What we could not figure out was the rumbling. It too seemed to be louder and more frequent. This time we could not attribute the noise to trucks. The road that the trucks drove on was not very busy to begin with. At the time of night, it should be dead. Yet the rumbling continued. It seemed to be coming from deep within the passage. B said he would ask some veteran cavers what could be causing the noise. We didn't spend a long time admiring our work. We still had to haul the gear up and out of the cave. Actually, we left some of it in that cave. It was still difficult work. What made it worse was that we were both exhausted. Our original plan was to be done with this cave and hit a couple of other caves in the area the next day, but instead we decided to crash at a nearby motel, charge up the drill batteries, go back to the mystery cave.
My journal goes on at length about a night after we left the cave. We got a room, dinner was excellent. I didn't sleep good despite the fact I was exhausted. We both slept in, so we got a late start back into the cave. The second day working on the cave went about the same as the first. We worked until both batteries were dead again. We were still not even close to getting through, and the howling and rumbling continued as the day before. Before I continue on with the next journal entry, I thought it might be helpful to the reader to explain a little bit about caving and about the atmosphere in the cave. As I reread and think about my description of the cave, I noticed that much of the language I used in the caving journal in the descriptions, or lack thereof, assume that the reader has a knowledge of caving and what it's like inside one. In other words, I written my journals for me. I will take this time to give a little bit more detailed description of the cave. I will tell about what it's like while we worked in the cave, and I'll summarize our feelings up to this point. The cave was discovered, I'm putting that in quotes, several decades ago when construction in the area unearthed the entrance. From that time to the present, it has been visited by mostly locals in the area and avid cavers in the region. Beer cans can be found intermittently through the cave, mostly in the upper half. When the cave was first entered, it was probably beautiful. Dust, graffiti, vandals, pigeons, and regular use have diminished the appeal. There are still places in the cave where small formations remain undisturbed as a reminder of what the rest of the cave used to look like. To enter the cave, one must have a good length of rope in order to rappel down into the rock. A nearby tree serves as a good anchor point. Once the rope is tied to the tree about 20 feet away from a small cliff, it can be tossed over the edge of the cliff from a small ledge about 15 feet below. Cavers can then descend a short distance to the cave. Once inside there, artificial light must be used. My light source of choice is a battery-operated, helmet-mounted light known as a tag light. Safe caving calls for at least 2 sources of backup light. For my backup lighting, I have a mini-mag light mounted to my helmet and another helmet-mounted light in my pack, which I always carry with me. I also have glow sticks that I can carry with me. These are not considered good sources of backup light by some, but they are good to use for taking lunch breaks. They could be used to get out of a cave if other sources fail. After a short climb over the large rocks, the caver comes to a large pit. The same rope is used to reach the bottom of that pit. The drop is about 50 feet or so, but it's not free hanging. In other words, you can't slide straight down the rope, which is preferable. You have to snake your way around sharp rocks as you descend. The ascent is made more difficult for the same reason. The pit varies in diameter from about 10 feet to 3 or 4 in a few places. The walls are lined with a sharp white rock called popcorn. Well, I'll correct that. It used to be white, but it's now covered with dust and dirt that was kicked down from above by years of caving. The popcorn makes a painful brush against the side of the pit. My choice of clothing is Levi's, a t-shirt, gloves, and knee pads. I usually leave the cave with few scrapes, but at least I am comfortable while I climb around inside. The temperature is stable year-round. Feels cool in the summer, warm in the winter. We've gone in on freezing days, and 10 feet into the cave, it's warm enough that the coats will not be needed. It's a good temperature to work in, as we learned. For this size drop, I usually use a figure-8 descending device. For the climb up, I attach myself to the rope using a Petzl ascender, but I climb up on my own without using the device. It is there merely as a safety attachment, in case I slip. Other cavers have their own methods of getting down and up. At the bottom of the drop, the caver gets to do some crawling for a while. There is a small room, about 6 by 6 feet. At the bottom, that gives the caver a spot to leave his harness and ascending gear, since there is no more steep drops, so the harness is not needed and will only get in the way. Once the caver gets down there to the 6 by 6 room, he can take a break under a ledge while the rest of the party comes down. There, he must drop to his knees to negotiate about a 10-foot passage that is only a few feet high. This is where the knee pads come in handy. The floor is covered with a soft dirt, intermingled with bits of broken rock from above. Then there's a thin layer of dirt that does nothing to soften the blow to the hands and knees as the caver works down the crawl space. As a reward, at the end of the crawl, he gets to drop his belly and scoot under a tight squeeze. Not really tight, just something low enough to make the caver scoot around in the dirt. Once the caver gets in on the other side of the squeeze, there are a few feet of crawl space, then the cave opens up enough to stand in. For most of the rest of the caver can stand or at least stoop. The cave splits off into several passages at this point. 2 routes wind around some rocks and crevices and come to abrupt dead ends, and the other 2 lead to small pools of water. Each of them is fun to explore, really. They all lead on for about 100 feet or so in a gradual downward slope, and most of the time the caver can walk upright in these passages. Other times he will have to climb over large boulders or occasionally crawl on the hands and knees. Water is a common occurrence in caves. I've been told that one of the local residents was one of the first people in the cave and that his cousin dove into the pools using scuba gear. Said the cave continued down for about a couple 100 feet underwater. What they were hoping for and what happens frequently is that the passage comes up somewhere else with a virgin cave passage to explore. Unfortunately, I don't possess the knowledge to give more detail about the types of rocks in these caves. When we were drilling, we would have some parts that were easier to drill than others, and there were different colors in the rock. We'll have the reference to the photos in the cave, but that's the best I can do to describe the makeup of these caves. At that point, the cave splits into 4 routes. The 2 passages that are dead end are to the immediate left of the caver. Straight ahead and to the right are passages that lead to pools of water. The entrance to the passage on the right is the largest of the 4. The arch opening rises nearly 10 feet in the air, ending a mere foot below the cave ceiling. As the cave enters the passage, the ceiling gradually lowers until it is about 6 feet high. It continues at this same height for the 40 feet that the passage travels in a continuous direction. This section of the cave resembles a hard rock mine. Its arch nearly perfect, and the floor flat and easy to walk on. It's easy to picture rusty mine cars on rail lines and dust-covered miners with blistered hands gripping dull picks. This pseudo-mine comes to an end, and the caver is once again forced to drop on the hands and knees and get reacquainted with the floor of the cave. This time, the crawl lasts about 20 feet. The floor is sloping gently downward for the first half of the crawl. Then it gets fairly steep and slippery. Able-bodied cavers can still climb carefully down that slippery slope, but when I go with B, I carry the end of the rope that we used to get down to this point, and I usually need to tie another short length of rope for the first rope to make sure he can use it to reach the bottom. The crawl lasts a few feet beyond the bottom of the slide. Over the next 10 to 12 feet, the caver slowly begins to regain standing position. After walking a few feet and climbing down a short drop, the caver arrives to a small level area which has a passage leading down immediately to the left. The passage ends about 75 feet later at one of the small bodies of water. To the right is a rock wall. Straight ahead is an indentation in a wall which goes back about 3 feet. On that wall, at the rear of the indent, is a small hole about the size of a softball. To get near the hole, the caver ducks under an overhang, kneels upon the rocks that rises above the floor by a few inches. By the time the caver reaches this point, he is either warm or sweating, and the first thing he notices is a cool breeze blowing out of that hole. It was my recognition of this hole as a potential doorway to unexplored portions of the cave that ultimately led to this telling of my experience. As has been my tradition for all the years I've been caving, the party reaches a point in the cave, usually at the deepest part of the cave, that all lights are extinguished. Complete blackness fills the eyes. For a moment, the individual caver strains the eye muscles, focusing in and out with the expectation of catching a crumb of light somewhere in the false night. After several futile moments, the caver turns his head at a sound, perhaps another caver, only to have the other senses return and then heightened. Sounds, smells, feelings that have been overlooked at this point comes racing to the caver in perfect detail. The pain of their own behinds singing the cave floor, smell of dust, sweat, guano, the sounds of modern material shifting on age-old rock as cavers attempt to find comfort on this solid foundation. At the back of every caver's mind at this time is what if? What if a person had to climb out of the cave with no light? Would he make it? Would he find all of the turns and bends which got him in this place? If not, would a rescue party find him in time? The depth of darkness recognized at this time is something that is rarely experienced outside of a cave. Many first-time cavers erroneously declare that they have to hold their hands to within 2 to 3 inches of their face before they can see it. Truth is, the human eye is incapable of seeing in an absence of light. If they did not hear something coming towards them, they would feel it before they saw it. Complete and total dark. This exercise is a great way to remind people to take back up lighting. As we proceed to work in the cave, we developed a system pretty early and little changing in succeeding trips. The first time in the cave, B took first shift at chipping away at the opening. After about a half hour, he needs a break and I take over. He told me what worked best and I continued doing the same. We would try new things from time to time, use new muscles, but usually stuck to the same method. We would use masonry bit and press on the drill as hard as we could and drill out a hole in the rock. Safety glasses and dust masks were worn while working. Then we would insert the bull pin and hammer it into the rock and break out small chunks of the cave. Then we would drill another hole and repeat the process. Occasionally the drill would hit a soft spot in the rock and that step would be shortened. We would work until we became too tired to continue, then B and I would trade. While one of us was working, the other would remain in the darkness and either eat or drink or just lay down on the cave floor padded by rope bags. After just a few rotations, we were tired enough to catch a nap while taking our breaks. The only light we used is the helmet light at the head of the worker. Since it was pointing towards the hole, the resting person was left mostly in the dark. This was a working benefit since the resting person was usually resting, and the rest break was also a chance to cool down a bit, which didn't take long in the cooler temperature of the cave. Fortunately, the temperature of the cave allowed us to work pretty hard and not overheat as much. I remember that I frequently looked at the hole and thought, hey, it's big enough, I think I can squeeze through, only to be disappointed on my attempt. However, even after the first attempt and failure, I knew that I would keep working on the hole until I got through. This despite the fact that I knew it would take more hours of hard work. It actually became an obsession with me. I tried to get out to the cave and work as often as I could. I hoped that the passage led to a larger, undiscovered cave that we would be the first ones to enter. I guess the explorer in me wanted to find a new frontier there in that cave. Since B is such an avid caver, he was motivated by the same desire to find a new, unexplored cave. What we did find was not at all what I expected.
February 10th, 2001. Scarcely 2 weeks have gone by, and we were already on our way back out to work in the cave. We admit we have become obsessed with the idea of getting through the passage. There may be a sign of how exciting our lives really are. It's not that we think there is going to be something great beyond this passage. We just like the idea of being the first humans on the face of the planet to set foot in a virgin part of the cave. Although if we found a hidden treasure, that would be fine with us. We got a late start and drove part of the way into the dark. When I tell people that I go caving at night, they wonder why. They don't stop to think that it's always night once you're inside the cave. All the way out to Mystery Cave, we talked about new ideas to speed up the work. B also told me he talked to some caver friends of his that came up with an explanation about the rumbling noises. They thought it might be the sound of water deep within the cave, possibly a waterfall. They couldn't really explain why the noise seemed to come and go. To me, it's just one more reason to get through so that way we can solve this mystery.
This trip, we took Bee's dog Whip. She's a Jack Russell Terrier. I was not at all concerned about taking the dog into the cave. We've taken her before. She answers the call of nature before we go in, and then waits until we get out again. Also, she's well behaved inside the cave. We simply had to lower her via a custom-made harness until she reaches the bottom of the main drop. Then she negotiated the rest on her own. She loves to explore, but won't go out of our sight. She doesn't have a light attached to her, so she has to wait for us. Another reason I didn't mind bringing Whip along was because we plan on putting her into the small hole and see how far into the passage she would go. That might give us an idea of what was on the other side. We knew if there was a drop-off we couldn't see, the dog would turn around and come right back out. We thought we might have to do some work on the hole before even the dog could get through. Despite working in the dark in the night, we were able to rig up and get down pretty quickly. We didn't take as many tools as last time, plus we left some in the hole so we wouldn't have to haul them out and back in again. I did manage to get 2 more batteries for the drill for a total of 4. Also a few more masonry drill bits. Even with the dog, we made good time getting down. Then something bizarre happened that I can't quite explain. The dog began exploring as soon as we let her off the rope. She was in hog heaven, sniffling and darting around our feet. She would run from one person to the other as we made our way back to the worksite. At that point, the cave splits into 4 passages. The dog seemed to run out of juice. She just stuck right by either Bee or me, which seemed kind of odd. As we progressed further into the cave, she would only stay by Bee. She seemed edgy, like she saw something she didn't like. As we approached the short drop-off before the hole, she had stopped and would only come further after we coaxed her. I heard our back stood on end, and finally as we got to within 20 feet of the hole, she began to whimper and hid behind Bee. Her tail was between her legs, and she was cowering down on the ground. Strange. I have seen her square off with dogs twice her size, but now she acts as if Satan himself was lurking in the darkness. I figured there must be animals that use this cave as a home, and Whip smelled their scent. Too bad it upset her, because there was no way she was going into the passage. We decided that with this new development, the nervous dog, one of us would work while the other stayed with the dog a few feet away from where we normally rested. We got right back into our routine of drilling, hammering, etc. With our extra supply of batteries, we were able to really push hard on the drill and not have to worry about using up the batteries. This did not make our work any easier, but it did speed things up a little bit. Progress was still slow. I really didn't mind though.
My general goes on for a while about the progress we were making. The entire time we worked, Whip did not move. She just lay there, on a rope bag, shivering. She would whimper from time to time. One thing I didn't think about at the time was that she would not take her eyes off that hole. We should have been more observant of this intuitive animal.
We were on our 4th battery when the second bizarre thing happened to us. Bee was working, he had just finished drilling a hole and was getting ready to hammer the bullpen when he stopped working and looked into the hole. I was kicking back, almost asleep, and hardly paying attention to Bee. He had a light by his side to illuminate the work area. I could see in the eerie glow a puzzled and intense look on his face. He looked over at me and shook his head. I asked him what's up. He said that he swore he just heard a strange noise emanating from the hole. He said it sounded like a rock sliding on a rock, sort of grinding. I assumed his ears were just ringing from the drill. I mean, he didn't wear any earplugs this trip. He assured me he heard what he heard. I didn't have an explanation, so I went back to dozing. Bee sat in the quiet part of the cave for a long time before he resumed work. Also, he would stop from time to time and just listen. Bee is very grounded and not one to pursue such imaginary sounds, but I believed he heard something. But I wasn't too concerned about what it was. I assumed we would figure it all out once we get to the passage. The final battery lasted about an hour or so. We were sitting around talking about our progress when I decided to see if I can get my head through the hole. My head could easily fit, but there was no way my shoulders were going in. As I was kneeling there contemplating how close we were, I noticed something that Bee overlooked. The wind stopped. In all the times I've been in the cave, I've always felt the wind blowing. The last time we were out working in the cave, the wind was blowing worse than ever. Even earlier, we remembered the breeze cooling us off, but now nothing. B-City did not know when it stopped. The rumbling even ceased too. Bizarre. This plain old cave was becoming mysterious. We talked for a long time in the dark cave. We debated what could possibly be causing these unusual events to occur. I think part of the reason we were sitting in the dark was because we were both too hammered to move. We could come up with no reasonable explanation for the strange things happening in the cave. After sitting for at least a half hour, we were slowly loading up our gear and started to the surface. Whip couldn't have been happier to get out of there. Once again, we left some of the tools in the cave, just put them in the hole. Not enough people used the cave to worry about, and we were too tired to care. We made a lot of progress this trip. It helps to have the extra batteries. We still have a long way to go, but it sure is nice to see how far we come.
The rest of the journal entry talks about climbing out of the cave, getting a room in a motel, and crashing. We were beat. In retrospect, I can't believe how casual we were about everything that was happening in the cave. At the time, the only thing we could think about was getting into the passage. Everything else, just a minor distraction. I do recall thinking that it would have been nicer to get in and see how the mechanics of the cave worked, where the wind was coming from, what was rumbling, etc. But now, weeks later, I think of my ignorance and naivete and shiver.